Welcome to the Wine Brothers Podcast. If you like what you're listening to, feel free to support us on Patreon at Wine Brothers Podcast, follow us on Twitter at Wine Brothers Pod, or follow us on Instagram at Wine Brothers Podcast. And if you want to email us, winebrotherspodcast@gmail.com. Hope you enjoy. Well, having a little Chardonnay this evening. Michael and I are sitting at the family table with our brothers and our fiancés and our moms.
Just one
of those. But yeah, I'm enjoying this. I'm having Michael's. It's a 2017 barrel. Does this have a name to it?
2017 Oak Chardonnay.
Oak Chardonnay. It's delicious.
And then we're gonna have the laymen give our take on the different Chardonnays. So we have one. First of all, from a look perspective, we have one that is much lighter in color with less golden character than the other. Which is which, guys? Can you explain to me where the colors come from? Why one is more gold?
Well, mine
than the
is
other?
a year older, so that's oxidation. So it's got a little more oxygen to it. Also,
So can I think of that as just rust then?
A little bit. Funny, but actually same process. And mine also has a little more oak in it, more oak influence, and that will brown it as well.
Okay, so just it's sawdust and rust.
As Michael so poignantly pointed out, it is medium plus.
Yeah, that's the color.
Medium plus oak.
That's
oak toasting.
So they toast the heads of the barrels, and that's so you have medium plus, and that's the level of toasting.
Oh, okay, so you'll get a darker color.
Yes.
So and wait,
flavor profile is a little different too.
So your Chardonnay, John, how long was that on oak?
About 8 months.
And Michael, what about for you?
Did you barrel ferment?
Yes, we did.
Okay, so yeah, we barrel fermented, and then ours went to barrel in March, so 8-ish.
Yeah.
So the same amount of time.
Same amount of time.
One had.
Well, mine also had 33% new oak.
So and mine had 0% new oak. All the barrels were used. I only had in the mix. I only had one medium plus barrel. All the rest were medium or convection toast of some format.
And we actually use all American oak on our Chard because we did some blind trials once, and the American won the blind trials.
Yeah.
And it's much cheaper, so we decided
vanilla.
that is a better one to go.
And
with.
we are 100% French here.
Oh, oh, oui, oui.
All right, Katie. What are the tasting notes on the not on Michael's Reserve Chardonnay?
This is my kind of Chardonnay because it doesn't feel extra.
Yeah, I would say if you compare the two, you taste John's. John's has more viscosity.
Yeah.
There's more malolactic influence there. You see more butter character and slightly more oak expression. Mine is a bit fruitier and has a little less oak expression to it.
So as you look towards Burgundy, Michael's would be from the northern parts of Burgundy, where mine would go to the further south because they tend to experiment a little more with the oak down there.
Yeah,
But
yours is a little heavier too, I feel.
yeah, it's weightier. It's
Yeah.
So yeah, from a pure viscosity standpoint,
feeling,
he bangs it out.
We've had good luck with we use DV10, I believe, with the cease, and that is a very
I love DV10 for barrel
great,
Chard.
great weight.
What is that?
What is it? Yeah.
It's a
just
yeast.
a type of yeast.
It's a type of yeast.
So
And it's really good for lees integration.
Yeah.
I feel like when it ferments and the lees fall to the bottom, mixing that back into solution adds
When you
better
have clean
flavor.
lees, you don't have to worry about them giving off aromas, and you can really stir them up, and that adds to the weight as well.
Yeah.
So how do they name these yeasts? These are like named by some lab somewhere, or
Yeah, well, they isolate them from different wineries, and over time,
And sometimes they'll isolate from a region and they'll call it
Rhone 4600.
or
they need to do a better job.
BDX.
Brandon. Like
Bordeaux.
Those are terrible names.
Vin 13.
In the wine industry, Michael says DV10. I'm like, I'd pay money for that because we've used it and it's got a
Right.
Yeah, but nobody goes out and buys a Chevy DV10.
What about a yeast called?
That's exactly what they buy.
What about
they buy the SRX 13?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What about a yeast called Cross Evolution? Does that interest
sounds
you?
good. Yeah.
It sucks.
Terrible.
The worst yeast.
Well, I feel like
The ones with extra marketing you might have to be careful of because they're trying to make up.
Well, that's the thing about this yeast is it doesn't need a good name because it's a good yeast.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Yep.
I respect
I really like DV9 better.
I know.
There's a D9 and there's no DV. That's right.
RCV 212.
Yeah. RC 212.
I think
Vin 13.
there is an RC.
Yeah. RC 212. It's a red.
Yeah. I mean, there's no V in that. I could have gotten that wrong.
Yeah. No V.
There's
But then there's. I like Vin 13. I like X5.
Yeah, we just ordered. We talked about this on the last episode. we ordered Vin 13 for a wine.
How do you
Right.
decide which one to use for which wine?
Experience, I guess, and then I always try and maybe try one new thing each year with a yeast.
Yeah.
So I didn't use last year. I didn't use on our Sauvignon Blanc a yeast called QA23, and I heard great things about it. So I experimented with that one this year.
Well, and they'll send you out a catalog, and it goes
my
through,
God.
and it's got all
It's like
the
a
notes,
Bible.
and
It's just
you
full
look
of it.
through it, and it's like, oh.
Does it have like little stapled packets of like yeast?
No.
No.
But it's got the names and it's got all the traits. So it's like this works well with these grapes, and these are the things that winemakers have good luck with it.
This has low nutrient requirements. This is
So, like-
If you wanted to culture your own, how would you like keep it alive from season to season?
It's tough. They
you
do
can
it in the
scrape
brew
under your
industry.
fingernails.
I like toe jam match myself.
They do it in the brew industry. They are always recycling their yeasts from
Yeah.
batch to batch.
But for wine, it's just too hard.
Or you'd have to keep it for an
alive.
entire year. And
Yeah,
you
you-
know.
you
you're
You
not-
couldn't just like leave some grapes in the freezer and then like that hadn't quite fermented.
I'm sure people tried it. It's a lot of work though.
Yeah, and the amount of yeast cells that you're adding, I mean, we're adding 500 grams of just a big brick of yeast.
So wait, per barrel, how much yeast do you put in there if you're fermenting in the barrel?
So it's like about 25 to 30 grams per.
That we don't know what that means. So that's like 2 tablespoons.
So
It's like a quarter cup.
yeah, in
Okay, so 3 tablespoons
That's a lot.
per barrel. So that's barely anything.
barely.
And does it
It's
look like
trillions of cells.
That's the high rate.
That's the high.
Does it look like bread yeast? Does it come?
It looks
Yeah, it's
exactly,
exactly
like
like
bread
bread
yeast.
yeast. Oh, yeah.
Some of them have slightly different looks. Like some are more rod shaped, and then some are more granular.
That's probably just how they like. Press
Right.
them
So
into
there's,
it.
you know what, like Vin 13, RC 212.
Yep.
All of these anchor yeasts have a certain specific shape to them, and you can if you pour them side by side and you look, one has a more rod shaped appearance
Yeah.
like your bread yeast, and the other one is more circular and has it's rounded.
Some
It's
of them, when
interesting.
you're getting this culture going, are really vigorous. So
Yep.
you're trying to get it down to temperature, and you're pouring, 35 degree, 45 degree juice into this. What is it like? That's Fahrenheit. So I guess it'd be you're pouring 7 degrees Celsius into something that's 35 degrees Celsius, and
Is this for our European listeners? You don't wanna
or
use
something
Fahrenheit?
that's 86 or 96 degrees. You're pouring something that's 40 degrees.
Right.
And you can't get it down. You want to get it within 10 degrees Celsius before you dump it in, so you're not shocking
18F.
these. And some of them are so vigorous compared to other ones that don't really kick off like that. Cross evolution being one. And it'll start creating more heat, so you can't get it down to temperature.
Yeah,
so
you
just
can't
wind
get
up
it to
having dump
match.
yeah.
You just have to dump it in, which is frustrating because you're like, almost there. Wait, why is the temperature going?
And all of
back
a sudden
up?
it's foaming out of the bucket. I go back to
But part of the thing that you do, like when you're separating it, this is called a temperation, right? So you pitch the yeast, it's around 103 degrees, and then you let it proof.
I go to the low
So this is the equivalent of like taking hot water and sugar and
Exactly.
putting the yeast in there.
Same
to, like,
deal.
Get it,
Yeah.
get it bubbling.
Yeah.
Same deal.
We use Go Firm. It's
Yeah. So you use a couple of yeast nutrients, so it protects the yeast, helps build their coats, their cell walls, membranes, and gets them prepared for their process, what they're going to have to do.
So like new haircut, pair of shoes.
Exactly.
Dress
Yeah.
them up.
You know, put on your down coat and go
Give him
outside.
some spending money.
Right. And so then we split. Then you start adding the juice
You
to
gotta
cool the
talk to
temperature
them.
down.
I talk to my yeast. I'm not kidding. Every time.
I say,
say?
go get them, little guys.
Yep.
They're doing all the work in your industry.
I
If you
say-
had
A lot of
to- if you
work.
had to ferment that
If
yourself,
they,
that would be a
if
lot
you
of
get a
burping.
couple trillion yeast to
lot of
unionize, we're
burps.
screwed.
I say, do what you were born to do. Sometimes I say
like
that. But you
That's a good
split
way.
you split the buckets up, so you pour half to one, half to another, and then you add more juice, and you keep splitting the buckets up. So
Just
this
spread it
year,
out, yeah.
last year I felt like I didn't have enough food grade buckets, and this year I found them. I found them on Amazon for first $8 a piece
The white
or something.
ones. With
Yeah.
The, what's the name of those?
I don't know.
Yeah, whatever.
So I ordered
Thought
them.
we'd give a plug, maybe a sponsor, but no.
Dude, that's how you monetize your podcast.
You're
you know?
right.
You say, hey, you know those food grade buckets you're getting? This is the link from
We have
affiliate
we have 11
Amazon.
listeners that could go.
Yeah, well, you
Four
guys
of them
check
up
out
here.
in the show notes, listeners. They're gonna have a link to these.
No,
buckets
I'm going
that
to
are
tell
really
you that you don't
recommended.
want to use this link.
Oh.
Because
I like 'em.
Here's what happened. So I ordered these buckets. They got delivered to me in a Lowe's box. And I was like, what the heck? So then I went to Lowe's, and they had the food grade buckets for $2 less. This guy had been selling,
Oh.
and he would order direct from Lowe's and ship to you.
Oh no.
They do
And-
that all the time.
Yeah, and so you
Dude,
were
man.
paying an extra $2. So I
But
went
this just
there,
means that Lowe's has a terrible website, basically.
Yeah. and Amazon's way easier, right? It's about friction. Yeah, sales friction. So I went to Lowe's and I bought like 15 buckets.
Yeah.
And brought them back to the winery with lids.
Well, we were storing all of our filters in cream and tartar, and finally I threw out most of the filters we had stored
Yeah.
and all of cream and tartar, and just started fresh this year because
I did that too. I
I don't-
chucked everything.
I understand wanting to save things, but at a certain point in a bucket that's seeping in oxygen and you're adding sulfur to it constantly, it's like, this is not going to help us.
Yeah.
Explain what the cream and tartar does again. I always forget.
So we use cream and tartar when we're cold stabilizing. It's like a very fine powder with all these little tiny crystals if you looked at it under a microscope. And when the wine is chilled, it allows nucleation points, so places where acid can bind when it's at pure saturation and fall out of solution. So we mix it up in really cold wine and it pulls all the acid and then it falls to the bottom and then we scoop it out and we can use it again.
Interesting.
That's
So how does that
You
differ?
scoop it out and use it again.
Is
Eh?
the same stuff in tartar sauce, or are they completely unrelated?
I've never made tartar sauce, so
Yeah.
I don't know.
Isn't
looks,
It's
cream and tartar
tartaric.
looks just like that.
Like that powder.
Yeah, I have
For those of you who don't know, because this is a podcast, my brother is baking right now and just poured a whole bunch of
Yes, the
fine
house
powdered sugar.
smells fantastic like
Yeah.
cinnamon buns. To pair well with our oaky
Oaky
shard,
shard.
a little butter.
It's pretty good.
I would say both of the shards go really well with Sherry's Berry's chocolate covered strawberry.
Link in the podcast below.
Yeah, an unlikely pairing.
Yeah.
I have that Twitter and Instagram.
You do? An unlikely pairing?
That was Arden and I. We had an idea at the winery where we were the unlikely pairing. We were going to talk
That's
about
cute.
wine. and food.
I like it.
I like that too.
That's great, man.
Well, Arden, when she is our tasting room director and manager, and she loves this Chardonnay, and she likes it with popcorn. She thinks it goes great with popcorn.
It does have
because of the
popcorn
butter.
esque,
Ooh,
but
I
that's the
like
medium
that.
plus tone.
That'd be good.
Right? The medium plus. Oh, our mom just unearthed some cream of tartar.
What are the ingredients?
It's
on that?
tartaric
It's
acid.
just
But it's finely powdered, right?
KHT. So
Ah, okay, so it's
I use it in
potassium.
one of my cookie
It's-
recipes.
Nice.
It's a
basic,
salt.
yeah,
an
it's
organic
tartaric
salt.
acid
Yeah.
bind with potassium.
Interesting.
So, yeah. I like them. As mine warms up, the oak starts to become more pronounced. Are you
Yeah.
tasting that?
I did notice that when it got a little warmer.
They're both great.
Well,
Delicious.
Well, any other comments? We've got a solid 13-minute segment in here.
13 minutes. Oh, it's 14 now. It just clicked
Oh,
over. Oh, but you have a 10-minute intro. So it's 4 minutes of content.
Well, I wanted to ask you. I have a question for you guys.
That Michael's is the Chardonnay for a summer afternoon, and John's is a little more for
Salmon.
Yes,
Yes.
that's exactly what I was
You hear
gonna
that?
say.
Mom likes me better.
Well, I wanted to ask you guys. So you're talking about all these different yeasts that you've added, and like that you buy. Have you guys ever tried to take the risk of whatever is on the grapes already?
Well, may I?
Go.
So the literature would tell you that you wind up with just one power yeast finishing up the majority of your fermentations, being some sort of Saccharomyces cerevisiae strain that's predominant in your winery.
Yep.
And lots of times it'll be one of the ones that they use, because a lot of the strains will produce a killing component that kills other yeast.
That's like antibiotics, basically.
Well, yeah, well,
Same kind
some
of
of them will.
concept.
Yeah, well, yeah, they produce something that kills any other wild yeast. So if you ever have a stuck fermentation with a wild fermentation, wild being what you were talking about, it can be a lot harder to get it going again too.
Yeah.
So there's that. And Michael?
Yep. The native yeast, the stuff that comes in on the skins of the grapes is dangerous stuff sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you get sometimes there's a lot of bacteria, so you're not adding
Yep.
a lot of sulfur.
It
You get a lot
wasn't
of
so
VA
bad
in
on the West
beginning.
Coast, but on the
Yeah.
East Coast, because of the humidity, a lot of those things survive a lot in higher populations.
Did you ever do a wild ferment in the West?
I had one kick off on me.
Yeah.
Like, so what I did was I made a Sauvignon Blanc. We brought it in. We pressed everything. It went into the tank. I settled it out, and then I did a rack, and it was a nice clean rack.
I remember
But there was
this.
a whole bunch of juice left in the bottom, and I was like, well, I could get a dirtier rack off that and put it in a separate tank. So I did, and I let that settle, and it settled for 3 days, and everything looked good. And then on day 4, when I was going to rack it, it looked like a foaming beer just blowing out of the top of the tank.
Oh gosh.
So, I mean, it wasn't juice I was going to use anyway. I was just trying to save what was available,
Yeah.
right? So,
I made a little too much.
I guess you could call that a native yeast, but let's go with there was probably yeast on the tank.
Yeah.
Make some kind of
The times that I have tried to get the last little bit have always caused me more problems
Oh, yeah.
than it's ever been worth. So
Yeah.
I don't even try anymore. It's like,
This was more than a little bit because it was almost 1,000 liters.
oh wow.
It was a big tank. We were making a huge lot.
Okay.
So, I decided
Worth
to
trying.
to give it a shot. So I added another settling agent. I added more sulfite and tried to settle it another 4 days. And the plan was I was going to run a different yeast in that tank
Just a little bit.
and then
Yeah.
reincorporate it into the main one, which I didn't do until the ferment was finished and I knew the wine was clean. But it was a fight because I hadn't pitched any nutrient into it, so the H2S crept up immediately,
Yeah.
and I just had to start slamming it with nutrient
And there's no way
to
you could
protect
just
it.
like seed your fields with the yeast that you wanted.
It's nature, man.
Yeah.
But you can't.
Air, wind
it's
blows.
Not nature, it's
Hold on.
monoculture.
The fifth element. Wind
So-
blows, fire burns, all of that
So
stuff.
one thing we actually try to do in our vineyard for another reason, then, is so we'll spray a pesticide, which isn't coming to me right now, to kill off any fruit flies that can puncture the skins of the yeast. And then we'll spray oxidate, which basically is hydrogen peroxide, essentially, chemically. Or, it's a really basic, and it's supposed to kill all the bacteria and yeast that might be growing before harvest to prevent any sour rots from taking over. Because the sour rots are essentially a wild fermentation happening on the vine.
With usually
Acetobacter,
Acetobacter, lactobacillus,
and yeast.
and other yeast that you might not want.
Okay, so I guess the moral of the story is
It's a
The
for
wild
me.
yeast
For me,
suck
when
and
people
we don't
talk
know.
about that, it is a marketing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, they know that there's a tank that their winery is littered with a specific yeast, and they don't have to dump a yeast in there because they know it's going to kick off. But
Or if
I
you-
would rather, like when I make wines, I'll use a variety of yeasts because I'm trying to gain complexity.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
So how often
And-
do you guys use 3 or 4 different yeasts?
Yeah,
in a-
this-
in a
Michael-
ferment?
I more so
Yes.
than John.
We're more.
So for our Chardonnay this year, I used 6 different yeasts.
Wow.
So how do you have any idea that
Across 12
isn't one
barrels.
of them just going to win?
No.
Well, this was
Different-
more. It was more as much as it was building complexity. It's also a research component for me
Yeah.
because I want to know what yeast I want to use next year, which promoted the best flavors that I felt
Oh, so you do this tank by
exemplified
tank.
Yes.
exemplified the best typicity. What's the word? Typicity. That's the word I'm looking for. Anyway,
Typeness.
Specificity.
which one was best for Chardonnay,
Yeah.
basically. So I'm fermenting in barrel with the Chard. So these are separate barrels. They're all inoculated with different yeasts. I
then you blend them.
I did 2 of each type. I actually had 6 barrels of stainless for our stainless program and 6 barrels of oak for our oak program. And I did a yeast of each. I did DV10 in stainless. I did DV10 in oak. I did D21 in stainless. I did D21 in oak. I
And you'll be
did
able-
CY3079 in stainless. I did CY3079
Would
in oak.
somebody like me be able to taste the difference between all those yeasts
Lots
for the
of
same
times.
juice?
You would, and I think one of the things that you might taste most would be mouthfeel, because some of them are higher glycerin producers, and you feel more viscosity in the mouth. But by doing the stainless, that was what I wanted, because the oak barrel isn't influencing what the yeast outcome is. All of the juice came from the same tank. It got split into all of these things. So at that point, you have a control. Everything is, what it should be. And the oak isn't lending a flavor effect that might affect what the yeast is doing. So I got to taste the yeast in their true form.
Well,
CY3079. Thumbs up, baby.
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
That was an awesome
good to know,
yeast.
actually. And the other thing that the native or the wild fermentation sometimes can be beneficial is, like, if you have something like Turolospora, start your fermentation,
Right.
and then Saccharomyces cerevisiae, finish it out cleanly. You can get some really complex aromas, and that's like it can be good.
So
It's
that
a gamble,
means that you
but
throw
Michael
sulfites in and then put like
Michael actually does that.
Yeah.
On a controlled basis, where he will start.
So they sell that yeast at Torlaspora.
and then start it, and then finish it.
What?
with
So
something
that's like
else.
a yeast that just dies at 3% alcohol.
Yeah, it doesn't
or
get
something?
far. It doesn't ferment cleanly through the whole thing.
Right, and it's a slow fermenter, but it lends itself to better mouthfeel generally.
So you like wait
and
for that to
complexity.
like die down, and then you check, and there's still sugar, and then you throw
Or you
in
just
a-
start it with that, and then you hit it with something
Right.
else later on.
Generally, there's I think it's 24 to 72 hour latency period where you let that do its thing, and then you come back with your Saccharomyces. And they go in tandem, but the Torlaspora goes a lot slower than the Saccharomyces and doesn't have as much influence once the Saccharomyces is in. That's the dominant strain that's doing most of the ferment. But the Torlaspora kind of has some precursors that the Saccharomyces feeds on to help build expression and mouthfeel and different flavors.
So it's really like a war, though, in there.
Yes.
Micro war.
Yeah. So I tried a couple of microbiological warfare situations where I put in 2 different Saccharomyces yeasts.
Dude, your podcast just got flagged by the CIA.
So, yeah, I tried because I read an article about these researchers who were using 2 different yeasts at once. I believe it was QA23 and X5, and whatever the byproducts were of the QA23, the X5 was using to metabolize, or vice versa, and it lended to better fruit and expression. So I tried that on a couple of barrels this year to see what I thought. I liked them better than the individual yeasts on their own. I liked it better than QA23 straight and X5 straight. But I did notice that there was some bitterness in those barrels that I didn't see in the other ones. This was on Sauv Blanc. So I don't believe I'll do that next year again. But it was interesting to just mess around.
I'm telling you, I see a marketing opportunity here. QA25, maybe is,
23.
like Purple Crush. Or
Or like, Spartan Warrior.
yeah.
Really go with the battlefield
Yeah,
imagery there.
What were the qualities of
You
the
think they
yeast
called the
like that?
Sidewinder missile the
Yeah.
Sidewinder missile?
Whoa, let your
sorry.
guest speak.
Oh, no. I was just that you said
Jeez.
that there was a yeast you liked better than the rest of them with the Chard. What
With
were
the Chard, I
qualities about-
love CY3079
Why did you like
because
that
it built
better?
a ton of mouthfeel and had some nice floral aromas to it. And then
The
DV10 was awesome.
So that's AKA Boca Bubbly.
No, Persian Archer. Michael, would you have you racked these off their leaves already, or do you still have them
Yes,
sitting on?
they've been
Okay.
racked off gross leaves, but
Yeah,
they
they're still on.
they were they
Are
were
they still
cloudy when I
separate?
put them in.
Are they still
No, they're no
oh,
longer separate.
Bummer. I'm curious how that would develop over,
Next time I do it, I'll call you down. I know it's harvest. You won't be able to come down. But
That's the one thing when that'd be fun to do more collaboration.
So when when the ferment was finished, I brought them all into one tank and added my malolactic culture and heated the tank. Because last year, because of the temperature of our winery and the temperature outside, I had to wait until March for the malolactic to finish, and I was just biting my fingernails and freaking out the whole time.
Cold wine.
Yeah, it won't.
Headspace.
I mean, everything.
Was there
everything?
headspace?
Yeah. Well, I had to keep topping it up. It was horrible because you got the breathable.
Cold wine
breathable bungs on there.
Absorbs more
gas.
too.
So
that's what I was.
Absolutely, it oxidizes way faster. It's just a risky situation. So this year. And malolactic cultures work best above 72 Fahrenheit, and it is not 72 Fahrenheit in our winery.
Yeah.
Not even close. So, especially when the temperature outside drops to 32 or 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah. So it took forever. We had it quarantined off in a separate room. We had heaters going, and still it wasn't clicking. So I added CH11. That wasn't powerful enough. I added CH35.
When you talked about the malolactic. Okay, so we're talking about Chardonnay here. So we went through some of the different yeasts that you add.
Oh, this is the secondary fermentation.
Yeah, so with the secondary fermentation, would I think of it like a yeast?
It's a bacteria.
It's a bacteria.
And what it's doing is it's turning malic acid into lactic acid, so it cuts through the acidity, makes it a little softer. It also creates that buttery note that you will taste.
The diacetyl flavor. So the malic acid is like the harsh acid of apples, and the lactic acid is the soft acid of milk. And
pretty much all your reds, for the most part, go through malic.
So I just ran a marathon, and I'm telling you what, lactic acid is not a soft acid. That shit sucks.
That burns.
Quick side note from the family vineyard. Nikki and I opened up the sparkling Frontenac Gris that we made. And I didn't get to tell you about this, but we popped the crown cap off it. And unfortunately, I was unprepared for what was going to happen.
This was method.
Oh no!
So Nikki and I are both, sucking the bubbles off, and it's tasting fantastic. Unfortunately, it mixed all the lees in it and flattened the nose a little bit, but it was very good. It's bitey with the acid, so I'm thinking a little dosage of maybe 1-2% sugar.
Right.
We can cut through that, but we were very happy with the final line.
That's awesome.
I can just see you guys praying over this bottle, foam spraying everywhere.
Well, was there a kiss?
Hey guys, we're trying to make this. We're trying to make this a family-friendly podcast.
So it's so funny. I'm sitting there like losing my head, when this is going like this. Nikki's mom's like, "Don't worry about it." I'm like holding my hand over it.
Oh no, it makes it worse.
Exactly. And she's like, "Don't do that." And she's she's like, "We got paper towels. Don't worry."
It's hitting the ceiling.
No. It was just just bubbly. It wasn't spraying. You have to hold when you hold your palm over it. It sprays.
24 grams a liter on that sugar to get you the 6 bar, huh?
No, I only went. I think I went 16 or 8 grams. I went real low.
Yeah. Wow.
This is method champenois, like
it wasn't done.
Technically,
final
it would be
ferment in the
it is
in the
done.
bottle.
Was it done when you added the sugar? What I'm asking is, was it completely dry before?
It's dry now.
Yeah, but was it completely dry? Because if you have...
Oh, I see what you're saying.
If you have like 20 grams of sugar left to ferment and then you add 8 more, then you're going to be about 6 bar.
I tasted it, and as far as my taste could tell, it was dry.
Yeah, well, with the acid, it's probably pretty tough. But and I mean, honestly, even with Clinitest tablets that you use for like,
I don't have any of that.
Yeah,
what we were doing, but I think what happened was once the yeast got mixed into solution, it just provided more places for the CO2 to.
Oh yeah,
and it just went crazy. So
that's awesome, man.
It was a little while. I'm prepared. I'm prepared.
So if you ever do something fun like add oak powder to a tank that still has a whole bunch of CO2 in solution, you get a very volcanic eruption.
Dude, you have a lot of surface area. You can make a
When we had DAP or
DAP's crazy. Yeah,
I always add it in solution, but when you screw the tape or the tank back down, it just whistles.
Yeah. The air is just pushing out.
You can see, if you look at it in the sunlight, you can see the gas billowing over the tank. That's pretty.
Well, that's like I always tell the story about AP chemistry. The first year, my teacher, Mr. was teaching AP chemistry.
I have a good story about it.
The vice principal was observing, and he was doing this experiment. I think we were like metal coating something, like showing a redox reaction.
Yeah.
Was this where you make mercury glass?
You were supposed to use zinc strips.
Oh.
He didn't have any zinc strips.
Oh, no.
We used zinc powder. and so people were like wiping up the lab tables with paper towel, and the paper towel was just spontaneously combusting. Where the zinc powder and apparently zinc powder
and
just
water
dissolving is like a very exothermic reaction. So just the dissolution. So you like wipe up the zinc towel with like a wet paper towel, and the wet paper towel just like explodes into flames.
We use zinc. I think we use zinc strips to make hydrogen to make gas to blow up balloons. We first did this. It was in Chem Club, and we were just fooling around. And he filled one hydrogen balloon with just hydrogen, one with hydrogen with oxygen, and one with just oxygen. And we did the hydrogen balloon. It popped, a little flame. He did the oxygen. It popped, no real flame. The hydrogen and oxygen balloon.
Stoichiometric ratio.
Exactly. Right? And he was holding it out here with a ruler and the candle, and blew it up, and the whole floor shook. The ceiling tiles, and there's just everybody's ears are ringing, and there's just dust. All I remember is the dust coming down from the ceiling.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
It's funny.
Oh,
I can't wait to go in to talk to Mr.
I liked, if you ever...
I'm sure he remembers the story about
our teacher did
powder burning the...
In my chem class, during the colloidal properties of colloids, I remember she threw up a whole bunch of flour and then lit a flame, and the whole thing just blew up like a cloud. It just caught on fire.
He used to do that with lycopodium powder. You take it on a spoon in front of a candle, and
I love that one.
I love it.
Yeah, it was always fun.
Good times, man.
All right. Thank you all for listening. I think we'll wrap it up here.
Sounds good. Happy holidays, everyone.
Thanks for having us, John.
Cheers.
Thank you so
Cheers.
much. Cheers.
If you liked what you are listening to, feel free to hit the like, share, or subscribe buttons on our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at WineBrothersPod. Follow us on Instagram at WineBrothersPodcast, or support the show on Patreon at Wine Brothers Podcast. Thank you very much, and happy holidays.